It's a conversation that we should be having, that.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I guess it's the manner, the way things have played out since the book has come out. Primarily a name being named in the Dutch version of your book.
Well, two names.
That just seems bizarre to everybody out there, because you don't accidentally put in a name, and you can't put it down to a mistranslation, can you? It does feel like a stunt to sell books, which I understand.
I wish it was the case.
Okay, how did it happen?
It's still being investigated right now.
What do you think happened?
I wrote and edited the English version of the book with one publisher. That then gets licensed to other publishers. I obviously can't speak Italian, German, French, Dutch, or any of the other languages that come out. So the only time you hear about the book is once it's come out in the public domain. I'm as frustrated as everyone else. I make it very clear in this book that I, in every way possible, want to adhere to the laws surrounding this subject. It's why I've been very careful in how it's described in the book, and it's why I've never spoken about it beyond what I've said in the public domain before. The reality is, though, is that this is information that is not privy just to me. Journalists across Fleet Street have known those names for a long time. We've all followed a certain code of conduct when it comes to talking about it. It's frustrating that now what's going on in the Netherlands with the book that was obviously immediately rescinded and is now being reprinted has happened, and I'm glad to hear so. But for me, I can only talk about the English version of the book that I wrote and produced.
But are you upset by it, though? Are you upset by it that those names came out when you didn't want that to happen?
I had never submitted a book that had their names in it, so I can only talk about my version.
Yeah.
I'm obviously frustrated. I wouldn't say I'm upset about it, because, to be honest, I've been operating in a bubble of no emotion for the last 10 days. But I am frustrated about it, just like I am many of the other things that I've seen.
All right. Chase, what do you got?
Well, they ask, what do you think happened? And this guy says it's still being investigated. Scobie, whatever his name is. And when somebody asks this question and you don't know, what you would expect to hear is, I don't know why this happened, or I'm not sure. When somebody says it's still being investigated, this is probably an attempt to hold back, essentially just saying, I need to find out how much information is going to come out of that investigation so I don't say too much. That's what I heard there. That's pretty suspicious. And he's also performing a lean with a head tilt there, with no facial expression whatsoever. And this neck exposure is something people do to convey innocence. And we tend to expose vulnerable parts of our bodies, like arteries, when we're feeling safe, or when we issue a challenge to somebody. You see people getting ready to fight and their neck goes up and their arms go out. This display, though, is not genuine. So we tend to either conceal arteries when we're feeling scared, and we expose arteries when we're feeling a little more comfortable, or when we're trying to pretend to feel comfortable when challenging another primate. So I think it's unusual here that he specifically mentions never having submitted a book with their names in it. That word submitted was weird to me, and I don't know anything about this case. So I may be way off. If I am, I'm sure you'll just call me an idiot in the comments. So I'm willing to bet there's something going on here where he's maybe shared an informal draft or something he's handwritten before that had these names in it, and he's using the word submitted as a safeguard against the accusations. So this is where it's really important to be able to see this kind of new word come out, which he hasn't used before, being able to hear between the lines, not just see between them, but hearing between these lines is such an important skill. And even if I'm wrong about this guy, it's an incredible skill to be able to pick up on these new words that start showing up that you haven't seen before. We always talk about behavioral changes, but we're also looking for syntax changes. Like, how is somebody's word choice changed throughout a conversation? Scott, what do you got?
All right, let's take a look at this woman again. We actually see an expression of disgust on her face. We saw one earlier. It wasn't as big. This is, Yeah. This is like a almost full-blown disgust expression on her face. Again, she's not even looking at him, not very much, not very often. She cuts her gaze away from him every time he looks up. Her torso, again, isn't pointed toward him, isn't aimed at him. So she's not engaging. She doesn't want to engage with this guy. I understand why. But here's something really interesting. When he's trying to give the impression of sincerity, like we talked about earlier, the end of those words of his sentences, the words got longer. Here they get even longer at the end of those things. So I think now they're going longer because they give him, and it may seem off kilter to you a little bit because it's not that much time at all, but it gives you time to think. When you know what you're going to say and you're going to elongate a word like that, it gives you that time to sit there and think about what you're going to say. Your brain doesn't need much time to start arranging things and putting things in order of how to explain something or to give your answer. So I think that's what's going on there. Another odd thing we see in this, there are almost zero blink rate spikes. When we see a normal blink rate, which is 15 to 20 times a minute when someone is blinking, that's normal. We don't see any, we don't see that and go, that's nothing wrong with that. But in here, sometimes they'll burst up to 60, 90 times at the high end of it. That lets us know there's psychological discomfort there. And we're not seeing any of that here, where, in my opinion, we should be. So this is kind of odd for me, is not seeing that. There are a couple of places where we see him go up just a little bit, but not even really much to talk about. But there are no flutters, no anything like that. So I thought that was a little bit odd. And he should be stressed during all that. Another thing that we're not seeing is him go, hang on a minute. No, I didn't do that. That's not what happened. You've got this wrong. He's not butting up against the guy. He's not coming back at him. He's just accepting it all and giving these prepared answers. That puts me in a position to say, and personally, I would go in deeper there. I'd let him say all he's going to say, then I would just jump down his throat with all that, because he should be saying, no, that's not what happened. He's coming out of that identity he's created or whoever he is, and said, no, that's not right, man. Let me tell you how it is. And if the guy kept talking, you shut them down. He would have at least tried to shut him down. He does sort of butt up against them when he starts talking there the first time in this, but it's not worth anything. He's not angry. He should be mad and stay mad that this is happening. When he says he's frustrated like everyone else, that's his way of sort of hiding in a crowd. I'm frustrated just like everyone is. No, everyone's not frustrated. I think they understand what's happened here. And you're right, Chase. What he did was, and I would think, I have no earthly idea, but I would put money on it, that he wrote the original thing. I think he wrote the book originally and put the names in it. And we sent these things out to these other publishers. He either accidentally or on purpose, I think it was, were they Dutch? Was that the publisher, a Dutch publisher?
Dutch publishers.
Okay, well, he sent it to them, and he messed up. He left the one with the words in there. Or what he could do is, if they put it in there without outside of the edit they supposedly got, then he would own that publishing company. He's doing a book on scandal. You got to be real careful in there. There's legalities you got to watch out for. And if they did that to him, he should have. We shouldn't even have seen this guy again. We just said, "Yes, I'm suing them for this," and he's not. He's not doing that at all. It didn't even come up. So I think he did that too. I think he sent him something, either by accident or on purpose. Like it's either a draft or just a full-on edit, but sent the edit by accident to them, and I think that's where they got that information.
Scott, you've talked to a lot of people in a lot of interrogation rooms, and like not even interrogation rooms, like hotel conference rooms and stuff, and like unusual places and unusual people. The one thing, I'm no doctor, but I studied neuropharmacology for 3 entire years. The one thing that came into my mind when I was watching this video, and maybe it'll resonate because you've talked to some interesting people, I had one word pop into my head in video 1 this morning. It was Vicodin.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking, because we're going to see some stuff go on with some veins here in an upcoming video that may go, because I would have thought beta blockers, but with the venous interaction that we're going to see in an upcoming video, that rules out the beta blocker hypothesis.
Yeah. Okay. And that would give us that slow movement, those really slow, smooth movements he's got as well. I would agree. I would tend to agree with that. So, Mark,
as an opinion.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I agree with your opinion, which is, yeah. Okay, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so the question here is something along the lines of, what do you think happened? It's a question in the positive. We're asking for a series of events or situations in the positive. Well, he comes back with, I never submitted a book that had their names in. He's coming back with what didn't happen, not with what, and we can easily come up with our ideas of what we think happened, and those ideas might be accurate or inaccurate, something between, we may have hit on it or not. Don't really know. But ultimately, we could come up with positives. If somebody was able to come up with a positive, especially an investigative journalist, which is what he is, if somebody says, look, well, what do you think happened? And they say, well, it's being investigated. And it's like, well, why not by you? Because that's your job. I mean, what an interesting thing to investigate is what actually happened. And what are your theories so far for the positive? What he has is a certainty around the negative there. Well, I mean, maybe it's true. Maybe he did never submit a book that had their names in it. But what's interesting is there is quite a bit of vocal fry across what he says generally, especially at the end of sentences. But this particular sentence has vocal fry throughout it. So I would say there's some extra stress in here. Well, why not? Because, this is the real crux of the matter, is did you purposely in some way deliver some names in what is quite a libelous nature? Did you maybe even purposely do it in a jurisdiction that means you're less likely to personally or the publishers get sued? I think the case now is they pulped all the books, so they were actually quite worried about those names being in there, and you can't get one of those books from a bookshop anymore. They're making new books without those names in. And then stress, I never submitted a book. So there's a lot in that sentence which has a lot of stress on it and goes in the negative rather than the positive. It's an interesting way to answer it. He then says, Chase, to your point about muting emotions, there's a question there, are you upset by it? And he says he's operating in a bubble of no emotion, Well, that's interesting, isn't it? You're above the usual human responses that you would expect to have. I mean, if I'd put some names in a book and I'm like, I shouldn't have done that, I think that I might get badly sued and bring down the monarchy, which, I might be for or I might be against. But I mean, do I want to be that person in history that, well, there's Napoleon, there's Bourbon, and then there's Scobie, who brought down the monarchy. Is that the hill that I want the monarchy to do? I want to create the hill that the monarchy die on? Am I really up at that level? I would probably have some emotions around that. He's saying he's in a bubble of absolutely no emotions whatsoever. I can't imagine that's correct unless he's the kind of person that has very few emotions about things. I mean, that's a possibility. Or it could be there's some chemistry involved there, not only in what might be going through his neurotransmitters, but also that his face doesn't move so much. And we do know actually with Botox is that one of the things it does is it can actually mute your emotional response because your face doesn't move as much. And the brain is often waiting for that cascade effect of muscles to move to get a sense of, here's the feeling that we're feeling right now. And if the face can't move, sometimes the brain doesn't know what feeling to get triggered with. It's not a one-way system. It's a closed loop system. The brain is waiting to see what the body does, and the body's waiting to see what the brain asks it to do. Anyway, interesting situation. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, so let's first talk about foreign language rights. I've got books written in 10 or 12 languages. I can't read those books. It might say Putin's a penguin in there. I don't have any idea. I know what I sold. I know what I gave them. I know the manuscript I gave them. So that's a realistic thing he can lean on and say, boom, he has rational thought train here. However, there are a couple of things that I would pay really close attention to. He knows that he can try to claim, hey, that's a mistranslation. Names are not translated ever. They're just transliterated. And if you're using the same script, they're the same name. So there would be no mistaking it. But what he can do is distance himself more. If you really want to see where his strength in this conversation and where his apprehension in this conversation are, it's very clear. His apprehension is when he first starts talking about played out. Watch his lips purse. That's likely containment or disapproval as he pushes his lips forward. Then he does back-to-back very heavy swallows. The male interviewer leans in on him and goes after him. He's browbeating him and batoning with his head now. Now, this is where we see that female interviewer really show hard disgust when the two names issue comes up. And then we watch him again. He looks like a child. His lower lip withdraws like he's waiting for approval. When he says mistranslate, he weaves a little bit in the chair. And now we see a real tongue jut. This is not grooming. This is a tongue jut push out when you say it's still being investigated. Here's another abandoned statement. Mark, the reason I was asking in that first one, it felt out of place, like he came to give his soliloquy, the fourth wall. I'm going to drop this thing. I'm not bound by the same rules as others. Now he does another one where he says, the reality is that everybody else knew. So he's setting up a story. He brought his pieces. He's putting chess pieces on the board so that he can play out whatever it is he wants. He's saying everybody knows what this is, so somebody else could have. What they don't ask him is, did you cause to be published? Did you leak? Did you pass information through a third person? Those are the kind of questions we would want to know. If you stitch these two things together and you hear him saying, I'm not bound by the same rules, and everybody knew it, so what is what I hear? That's pretty clearly an embedded confession to me. That's a person saying two things that if I link those two together, it gets pretty clear. And it looks like he teed one up for the other. Here's an interesting piece for me. You can tell where his confidence is because, Scott, you brought out in the first one, his fingers were together. When he gets down to the point where he's saying that it's being investigated, the translation, I never submitted. Look at his fingers and thumbs. They're apart. I never submitted the book with those names in it. That's where that next question comes. Did you resource the answer? Did you leak the answer? Did you ensure somebody else gave him the name? But he gets away with it and moves away quietly. That's all I got.
All right. One thing, Mark, going back to what you're talking about emotions and the face, Paul Ekman did a whole thing on that, and so much so that I do this thing where I have this big box of these little mirrors I got at the dollar store. And so if it's a small enough group, if it's 50 or under, then I take this box with me and I pass out these mirrors and I tell them to make the expression and explain to them how that works. So yeah, that's a fascinating study about how the expressions you make can actually ignite those emotions that expression is making in your brain, and you'll feel better. That's why they say smile a lot and all that. But if you're frowning, if for whatever you're doing, that will generate that feeling in you when you do that. So
yeah, I went to like a John Wick level gunfighting school. This was while I was in the military.
Except for you really can get killed.
Yeah. Yeah. So during this school, it's very long. It's several months long of school, and it's hours and hours a day. But they have these GoPro cameras and stuff. Well, they're not GoPros, but they're some kind of a little camera. But if you make facial expressions while you're like moving through this like fake apartment building or doing anything, or you have a jam that they induce, like they'll stick rubber bullets in your magazine to make it jam. So like you don't deal with it right away and you show like a grimace or a fear response or angry face, you have to start over. The whole school, not the day, the whole entire school, you go back to day one. And they train out, you move through without making facial expressions. And it lowers your level of fear gradually over the course of that school. And they do a few other things, but that was fascinating to me. That was the first time, like I knew it consciously, but when they did that, like you can feel it. The fear goes away because the facial expressions go away.
Yeah. Excellent.
All right. Let's take a look at the next one.
Good story.
One of those tape replays.
It's a conversation that we should be having.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I guess it's the manner, the way things have played out since the book has come out. Primarily a name being named in the Dutch version of your book.
Well, two names.
That just seems bizarre to everybody out there because you don't accidentally put in a name and you can't put it down to mistranslation, can you? It does feel like a stunt to sell books, which I understand.
I wish it was the case.
Okay, how did it happen?
It's still being investigated right now.
What do you think happened?
I wrote and edited the English version of the book with one publisher. That then gets licensed to other publishers. I obviously can't speak Italian, German, French, Dutch, or any of the other languages that come out. So the only time you hear about the book is once it's come out in the public domain. I'm as frustrated as everyone else. I make it very clear in this book that I, in every way possible, want to adhere to the laws surrounding this subject. It's why I've been very careful in how it's described in the book, and it's why I've never spoken about it beyond what I've said in the public domain before. The reality is, though, is that this is information that is not privy just to me. Journalists across Fleet Street have known those names for a long time. We've all followed a certain code of conduct when it comes to talking about it. It's frustrating that now what's going on in the Netherlands with the book that was obviously immediately rescinded and is now being reprinted has happened, and I'm glad to hear so. But for me, I can only talk about the English version of the book that I wrote and produced.
But are you upset by it, though? Are you upset by it that those names came out when it had nothing, you didn't want that to happen?
I had never submitted a book that had their names in it, so I can only talk about my version.
Yeah.
I'm obviously frustrated. I wouldn't say I'm upset about it because, to be honest, I've been operating in a bubble of no emotion for the last 10 days. But I am frustrated about it, just like I am many of the other things that I've seen.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.
You know what?